KaraokeBooks.
The Gambler. Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. Chapter 3. On the morrow she said not a word to me about gambling. In fact, she purposely avoided me, although her old manner to me had not changed. The same serene coolness was hers on meeting me, a coolness that was mingled even with a spice of contempt and dislike. In short, she was at no pains to conceal her aversion to me. That I could see plainly. Also, she did not trouble to conceal from me the fact that I was necessary to her, and that she was keeping me for some end which she had in view. Consequently, there became established between us relations which, to a large extent, were incomprehensible to me, considering her general pride and aloofness. For example, although she knew that I was madly in love with her, she allowed me to speak to her of my passion, though she could not well have showed her contempt for me more than by permitting me, unhindered and unrebuked, to mention to her my love. You see, her attitude expressed how little I regard your feelings, as well as how little I care for what you say to me, or for what you feel for me. Likewise, though she spoke as before concerning her affairs, it was never with complete frankness. In her contempt for me there were refinements. Although she knew well that I was aware of a certain circumstance in her life of something which might one day cause her trouble, she would speak to me about her affairs, whenever she had need of me for a given end, as though I were a slave or a passing acquaintance, yet tell them me only in so far as one would need to know them if one were going to be made temporary use of. Had I not known the whole chain of events, or had she not seen how much I was pained and disturbed by her teasing insistency, she would never have thought it worth while to soothe me with this frankness, even though, since she not infrequently used me to execute commissions that were not only troublesome, but risky, she ought, in my opinion, to have been frank in any case. But, forsooth, it was not worth her while to trouble about my feelings, about the fact that I was uneasy, and, perhaps, thrice as put about by her cares and misfortunes as she was herself. For 3 weeks I had known of her intention to take to roulette. She had even warned me that she would like me to play on her behalf, since it was unbecoming for her to play in person. And, from the tone of her words I had gathered that there was something on her mind besides a mere desire to win money. As if money could matter to her. No, she had some end in view, and there were circumstances at which I could guess, but which I did not know for certain. True, the slavery and abasement in which she held me might have given me, such things often do so, the power to question her with abrupt directness, seeing that, inasmuch as I figured in her eyes as a mere slave and nonentity, she could not very well have taken offense at any rude curiosity. But the fact was that, though she let me question her, she never returned me a single answer, and at times did not so much as notice me. That is how matters stood. Next day there was a good deal of talk about a telegram which, 4 days ago, had been sent to St. Petersburg, but to which there had come no answer. The general was visibly disturbed and moody, for the matter concerned his mother. The Frenchman, too, was excited, and after dinner the whole party talked long and seriously together, the Frenchman's tone being extraordinarily presumptuous and off-hand to everybody. It almost reminded one of the proverb, "Invite a man to your table, and soon he will place his feet upon it." Even to Polina he was brusque almost to the point of rudeness. Yet still he seemed glad to join us in our walks in the casino, or in our rides and drives about the town. I had long been aware of certain circumstances which bound the general to him. I had long been aware that in Russia they had hatched some scheme together, although I did not know whether the plot had come to anything, or whether it was still only in the stage of being talked of. Likewise I was aware, in part, of a family secret, namely, that, last year, the Frenchman had bailed the general out of debt, and given him 30,000 rubles wherewith to pay his treasury dues on retiring from the service. And now, of course, the general was in a vice, although the chief part in the affair was being played by Emil Blanche. Yes, of this last I had no doubt. But who was this Emil Blanche? It was said of her that she was a Frenchwoman of good birth who, living with her mother, possessed a colossal fortune. It was also said that she was some relation to the Marquis, but only a distant one, a cousin, or cousin german, or something of the sort. Likewise I knew that, up to the time of my journey to Paris, she and the Frenchman had been more ceremonious towards our party. They had stood on a much more precise and delicate footing with them. But that now their acquaintanceship, their friendship, their intimacy, had taken on a much more off-hand and rough and ready air. Perhaps they thought that our means were too modest for them, and, therefore, unworthy of politeness or reticence. Also, for the last 3 days I had noticed certain looks which Astley had kept throwing at Emil, Blanche and her mother, and it had occurred to me that he must have had some previous acquaintance with the pair. I had even surmised that the Frenchman too must have met Mr. Astley before. Astley was a man so shy, reserved, and taciturn in his manner that one might have looked for anything from him. At all events the Frenchman accorded him only the slightest of greetings, and scarcely even looked at him. Certainly he did not seem to be afraid of him, which was intelligible enough. But why did Emil, Blanche also never look at the Englishman? Particularly since, apropos of something or another, the Marquis had declared the Englishman to be immensely and indubitably rich? Was not that a sufficient reason to make Emil, Blanche look at the Englishman? Anyway, the general seemed extremely uneasy, and one could well understand what a telegram to announce the death of his mother would mean for him. Although I thought it probable that Paulina was avoiding me for a definite reason, I adopted a cold and indifferent air, for I felt pretty certain that it would not be long before she herself approached me. For 2 days, therefore, I devoted my attention to Emil, Blanche. The poor general was in despair. To fall in love at 55, and with such vehemence, is indeed a misfortune. And add to that his widowerhood, his children, his ruined property, his debts, and the woman with whom he had fallen in love. Though Emil, Blanche was extremely good-looking, I may or may not be understood when I say that she had one of those faces which one is afraid of. At all events, I myself have always feared such women. Apparently about 25 years of age, she was tall and broad-shouldered, with shoulders that sloped. Yet though her neck and bosom were ample in their proportions, her skin was dull yellow in color, while her hair, which was extremely abundant, sufficient to make 2 coiffures, was as black as Indian ink. Add to that a pair of black eyes with yellowish whites, a proud glance, gleaming teeth, and lips which were perennially pomaded and redolent of musk. As for her dress, it was invariably rich, effective, and chic, yet in good taste. Lastly, her feet and hands were astonishing, and her voice a deep contralto. Sometimes, when she laughed, she displayed her teeth, but at ordinary times her air was taciturn and haughty, especially in the presence of Paulina and Maria Philippovna. Yet she seemed to me almost destitute of education, and even of wits, though cunning and suspicious. This, apparently, was not because her life had been lacking in incident. Perhaps, if all were known, the Marquis was not her kinsman at all, nor her mother, but there was evidence that, in Berlin, where we had first come across the pair, they had possessed acquaintances of good standing. As for the Marquis himself, I doubt to this day if he was a Marquis, although about the fact that he had formerly belonged to high society, for instance, in Moscow and Germany, there could be no doubt whatever. What he had formerly been in France I had not a notion. All I knew was that he was said to possess a chateau. During the last 2 weeks I had looked for much to transpire, but am still ignorant whether at that time anything decisive ever passed between Mademoiselle and the General. Everything seemed to depend upon our means, upon whether the General would be able to flourish sufficient money in her face. If ever the news should arrive that the grandmother was not dead, Emil, Blanche, I felt sure, would disappear in a twinkling. Indeed, it surprised and amused me to observe what a passion for intrigue I was developing. But how I loathed it all! With what pleasure would I have given everybody and everything the go-by! Only, I could not leave Polina. How, then, could I show contempt for those who surrounded her? Espionage is a base thing, but what have I to do with that? Mr. Astley, too, I found a curious person. I was only sure that he had fallen in love with Polina. A remarkable and diverting circumstance is the amount which may lie in the mien of a shy and painfully modest man who has been touched with the divine passion, especially when he would rather sink into the earth than betray himself by a single word or look. Though Mr. Astley frequently met us when we were out walking, he would merely take off his hat and pass us by, though I knew he was dying to join us. Even when invited to do so, he would refuse. Again, in places of amusement, in the casino, at concerts, or near the fountain, he was never far from the spot where we were sitting. In fact, wherever we were in the park, in the forest, or on the Schlangenberg, one needed but to raise one's eyes and glance around to catch sight of at least a portion of Mr. Astley's frame sticking out, whether on an adjacent path or behind a bush. Yet never did he lose any chance of speaking to myself. And, one morning when we had met, and exchanged a couple of words, he burst out in his usual abrupt way, without saying, "Good morning." "That Emil, Blanche," he said. "Well, I have seen a good many women like her." After that he was silent as he looked me meaningly in the face. What he meant I did not know, but to my glance of inquiry he returned only a dry nod, and a reiterated, "It is so." Presently, however, he resumed. "Does Emil, Polina like flowers?" "I really cannot say," was my reply. "What? You cannot say?" he cried in great astonishment. "No, I have never noticed whether she does so or not," I repeated with a smile. Then I have an idea in my mind," he concluded. Lastly, with a nod, he walked away with a pleased expression on his face. The conversation had been carried on in execrable French.
KaraokeBooks.